And here we go. It is 5 seconds into our first fireside chat on the new Big Marker platform from Huntress. It's a new platform they've used for a couple other webinars and decided that fireside chat should be a part of that. So if we accidentally hang up on everybody, I've been assured I don't have that power, but you never know. So if I accidentally hang up on everyone, I'm very sorry. But welcome to April's Community Fireside Chat. Once again, we're joined by the amazing team at FifthWall Solutions to talk about all things cyber insurance. There's a whole lot of nuance to cyber insurance, and if you haven't joined us for previous office hours or watched the cyber insurance masterclass that we did with FifthWall last year, highly recommend doing a little bit of catch up, as a lot of the information that we talk about here is pretty timeless. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and do some intros here. Reid, can we get started with you?
Awesome. Thanks, Becky, and hi, everyone. My name is Reid Wellock. I am the president of FifthWall. Been with the company for about 6 years, and I usually introduce myself as the cyber insurance nerd, and love most all things cyber insurance, even the bad. Looking forward to, I think we got a couple topics on here that I think we've gotten a lot of questions around. So looking forward to it.
Yep. I'm Wilson Henry at FifthWall, and I'm the cyber insurance specialist over here. I like that some people call me a super broker just because of our access at FifthWall, and I'm more than just your normal broker because we really like to go into risks, not only for MSPs and their policies, but clients, all types of industries. So experience on that end on the client side at FifthWall.
Perfect. And I guess I didn't introduce myself either. So if anybody in the audience doesn't know who I am, I'm Becky Teal. I head up our community efforts at Huntress. It means I spend a lot of time with peer groups in particular, but also MSPs at events and things, understanding what's going on in your businesses, how Huntress can help make it better, and bringing that information back to our teams to make sure that we keep doing the things that you need us to do. So Reid, Wilson, we talked a little bit ahead of time kind of what some of the things we might want to cover. I know that E&O has really been top of mind on a lot of folks lately, as have warranties. So where would you like to start today?
Well, I think warranties are a heavy topic, so we might want to save a heavy lifting for later, so we get warmed up here, so I don't pull a hammy. So I think talking about the E&O is a really good thing to start on, because Wilson he puts the bro and broker. I just thought of that, by the way, Wilson. There you go. It's a work in progress. But he's really on the street level when it comes to working with our MSP partners around, we at FifthWall talk a lot about, working with MSPs to talk to your clients, understand what their exposure looks like, and engage it in a risk evaluation approach, right? And you're kind of looking at your clients as their exposure is kind of your exposure, right? Which inevitably comes to, well, wait a minute, what about me? What about the MSP? What should I be doing? What should I be looking for? And I think right now the market is in an interesting place. We came out of a lot of turmoil for MSPs trying to get tech E&O insurance specifically. Back in 2021, it was kind of absolute insanity. So it was not uncommon for us to hear stories from an MSP that said, hey, look, I just got 4x'd on my price for my insurance, right? What do I do? No joke. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think what we've come out of is, there was a visceral reaction to MSPs in general, as far as, in our world, we look at aggregation of risk that could potentially lead to systemic risk, right? So an MSP has a lot of access. It's a easy conduit to get from one to many. And insurance as a whole just kind of put a scarlet letter on MSPs really early stages of the game. And we're finally seeing things open up. We're finally seeing more meticulous approaches, we'll say, from carriers that are asking good questions, that want to better understand the risk, and finally doors are being opened up. So it's kind of like the storm passed, and we're starting to see some folks, pop their heads out and be willing to take closer looks and actually have a more realistic view. So I wanted to allow Wilson the opportunity to kind of go through what he's seen. And really, I think Wilson, probably some of the conversations you've been having most recently, just whenever someone's coming to you and saying, hey, look, what matters, what's being looked at, might be a good place to start.
Yeah. And just kind of to set the stage. So when we're writing policies for MSPs, every MSP is different size wise, clients they deal with, but you pretty much all need the same structured policy. We deal with multiple different carriers that like different risks. So the technology, errors, and emissions portion paired with comprehensive cyber insurance. That includes third-party coverages, first-party coverages, and crime coverages. Needing that full boat of insurance together on one policy is what we strive to have every MSP, carry. And I think underwriting is a huge piece that I see changing. We all talk about, the clients are now needing MFA here and, EDR now and backups. Well, MSPs, these carriers are asking more and more. We have one carrier specifically starting with master service agreements. So your MSA, if they're going to ask for your MSA first, if they like it, we can start moving forward. If they don't like it, sorry, see you later. If you don't have a good MSA in place, I know that's a talk for next month, Becky. I think your next one's all about having a lawyer in your corner. So lead into that one for next month, but handle your MSA and then policies and procedures that are in place. So incident response policy, I think that's another talk coming up in 2 months. So having that in place, carriers want you to have the policy and procedures in place. When we're not even getting into the security talk and what you have internally, having those policies and procedures are key. I work with smaller MSPs just getting started, needing a policy in place. A lot of them don't have an incident response plan in place internally yet. So carriers will actually take you on and underwrite you, but over the policy period, it's written that you need to put a policy in place. They can help you do this. They have templates. Us at FifthWall, we have templates, but they want to see that be put in place. Larger MSPs, it's more on the master service agreement. So having that in place as well. Go ahead, Reid. But
I just want to comment on that real
more
quick.
And more of that.
One cool thing that's kind of happening, Becky, is we're, the example I've given them on cyber for a long time is like a nice benefit of a client having cyber insurance is that when it comes time, when the event occurs, there is a defined process, at least on one side, right? And for at least the end client to understand that is helpful. You need a lot of context around that. You really need to develop a good IR plan, but that's really helpful. With where Techno is right now, we still get a lot of questions from MSPs, just kind of like trying to define the maturity of their business, right? Like, okay, what matters if we're talking about a contract, for example? We're not going to give legal advice, right? That's not our place. But we got to really, it's kind of cool. You can point to an entire industry that's saying, well, look, we've looked at enough of these things. We know what should be in place, right? That makes sense. And it does kind of form a nice template. So like the process does allow for a lot of learning to occur as well. So I just wanted to comment to that.
Yep.
No, that's fascinating that instead of just saying, do you have XYZ in place? They're looking at bigger picture, that policy and procedure. What types of conversations are you having? Which defining your own maturity is a very subjective conversation. Like that's a tough one to be like, how mature are you?
Yeah.
Some of that depends on, am I talking to my 12-year-old nephew? Am I talking to a partner, a prospect? Some of that, even business maturity, I have to believe is some folks think they are more mature or less mature than they actually might be. How are insurance companies defining some of that maturity? Are you seeing some trends along that?
Wilson, what are you seeing?
I'm seeing insurance carriers get again into the policies and procedures, but also, security. Do you have certain things in place in the industries these MSPs work in? I think more mature MSPs work with, those industries like defense contractors or people with higher risks, healthcare industry, rather than a spread out client base. And premiums reflect that too. Carriers are underwriting based on the clientele that you service and at what level. So, clients with higher risk, carriers are looking at that and asking more questions about that.
Wilson, quick question. Would you say that for an MSP that has more of an eclectic client base, right, that's spread out, would a carrier view that as higher risk versus an MSP that's more industry specific?
Depends on the industry, but I would say, yeah, if they focus on one industry in specific, because they're asking about revenue tiers. How is your revenue based off on certain industries? I see that a lot on applications. They want to know where your risk is pushed out into certain industries. Are they in, government? Are they in law firms, public service? Are they in healthcare? What do you do in these certain industries? So I would say depends on the amount of revenue as well, coming out of those industries. But I would say if you would have all your eggs in a basket, 90% of your revenue comes out of healthcare, you're a different risk than 90% of your, revenue spread out. I think you're a much higher risk. For instance, I think this is a good example. I wrote a policy for an MSP, I think a month ago. They worked primarily with defense contractors. At the same time, I was working with an MSP that worked primarily in law firms. Their premium difference, their revenue is probably about the same, kind of really close security-wise and what they had in place. Their policy premium was completely different just because of that one industry. The defense contractor was probably close to 10 grand on a yearly premium. The other was probably around 4 grand. I mean, almost a 5 grand difference in policy premium. So that's a lot of what they're looking at nowadays, is digging into the industries that you serve as an MSP. Just insight. I think that it's helpful, but
No, that's also helpful though. I would imagine if an MSP knows kind of going in as they're trying to determine some of their price per seat, that some of those customers might need to be a little bit higher if they're a higher risk industry, that they're going to cause the MSP to have higher premiums. Is that something you're hearing MSPs are doing, or are we just now starting to see some of those price differences?
I don't think the price difference are changing too much year over year on renewals. Reid, what do you think on that?
I think, I think, well, it's a very interesting way to think, Becky.
Yeah, it is.
Which is, look, if you go under the assumption that my client's exposure is my exposure, right? And now as I try to evaluate, mitigate, and transfer my own risk, okay, there's a higher cost because I've taken you on as a client, right? Now, here's the tough part about this is you could certainly start to, we're already seeing the trends, and as Wilson said, like, they're coming up. We're starting to see those. But, and for anyone that's heard me on a webinar, I probably say this 10 times, I'm sorry, but it's not a standardized industry. So this is a tough one where it's really hard for you to point to one specific carrier, or maybe even just a couple carriers, and say, look, this is what I'm seeing, because you probably could also go to a couple other carriers and find something different as well. So the justification behind that may be a little bit hard. Just for everyone on the webinar here to know kind of who we are, what we do, is we represent the entire marketplace, right? And so, like, the secret of our sauce, so to speak, is that we will turn over every stone. We're going to go to every market, every carrier. And a big reason that we do that is that everyone's different, right? All these carriers are still acting independently, and they all ask for the main part out of their own previous pain. So if they had higher losses in government contracting, right, they may price it a little higher, right? But part of Wilson's job is he's still going, okay, well, is everybody looking at it the same way, right? So as we kind of get to more of a baseline, that's a very interesting thought, especially as there's more transparency. It's like, right? And as we start to document that.
It's like sports books a little bit. When's that risk changing?
Yeah.
Who's looking? It's organized gambling. It really is. Who's looking at that risk differently? Do they have different lines for that premiums? If you think about it that way, but yeah.
But I think of it as the, if my cost is higher to deliver services to you, potentially, that I should have to charge you more for those services. And so it's just a lot of this, honestly, everybody in the audience, a lot of these chats are my questions about insurance, and then you get to hear them out loud. So sometimes it's just where my brain goes to
Becky, we're always looking for people that want to ask questions about insurance. Come on.
I have a lot of questions. questions. Let's move over to Q&A for a few minutes.
Yeah.
One of the cool parts about Big Marker is we can move stuff from chat into Q&A so we don't lose things in chat. So first question, Kevin, and he's asked, FifthWall has any recommendations for Canadian cyber insurance providers? And is FifthWall coming to Canada?
FifthWall is not in Canada yet. We get asked that every year, and I hope that's going to change soon. But we do not broker in Canada yet. My recommendations, though, it's tough if you're in Canada. You probably already know this, and you're going to go, duh, Reid. It's hard. There's not a ton of options. There still are the larger shops up there, right? So you still have Hub International that's up there. You've still got Marsh that's up there. In the recommendation, I would probably say, given you're kind of still looking at the larger shops, still take in like some of the content that we're providing. It is still somewhat universal when it comes to the approach and the questions that you want to ask, right? And then where it is that you want to lean in, right? So if for your techie if you are not getting to the level that we're describing here with your broker, push back and say, well, hey, I have questions. Is this being evaluated? We talked about, I was on a webinar recently and they wanted to lean in a little bit more on the policy and procedure side, the contractual side. Is that being evaluated? Have you talked to a market that's actually considering those things? No. Okay. Do you mind going back out there and seeing what else is out there that would kind of consider that? I would consider myself to be a lot prettier than others when it comes to that. So, but for Canada, unfortunately, I'm sorry, we're not there yet.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm just adding a handout in based on some conversation we had earlier about incident response and needing an IR plan. We did do one last year to do a incident response checklist. And so I'm just trying to play with this new functionality and uploading that into the handout section. So that's what I was messing with for a moment. Let's see, next question. Working at an MSP and our clients are always asking us about cyber insurance. Are there any important gotchas that I can warn my clients about? Feels like a very
there's a big paintbrush there.
And if there's any, if there's anything on your specific website that we can drive kind of this one to, we can drop those links in the chat as well.
So I'll take this one. It's we define gotchas as, let's see here, understanding what's important, right? So like, what are the parts and pieces? If your clients are asking you about cyber, and I'm assuming they're asking questions about like, hey, when a carrier is looking at me, what matters, right? So like we use the analogy of like, how tall do I need to be on that ride? And if I'm on the ride, am I paying more than others because I'm not doing certain things? We do have this, we'll get this out. I'm not sure the best way to get this out, but we have a couple different pieces that, this is what we do at FifthWall. We will certainly work with your clients, but the information that we provide is really basic because we've taken a lot of what the carriers are looking for when you ask that question, and we've distilled it down to just some basic questions, right? And so really at the core level, they're looking at the main core controls of MFA, segregated backups is like the mainstays. Those are kind of the seatbelts and airbags, right? They want to make sure there's regular patching done. As you get to larger risks, as you get to maybe higher risks, depending on industry, they're going to focus a lot more on MDR. They're going to be focusing on security awareness training. And so those are kind of going to differ depending on the risks, i.e. the clients that you have, the size of them, the industries they're in. But there is kind of a general framework of what you should be looking at. And it's a really nice thing because you can take that framework and go to your client and say, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just pointing to an industry that's saying these things are important. They're so important, some of them, they won't even write you if you don't have them in place. And in others, they will provide you with better premium if you do have them in place. So it's a really good validator.
All right. If it's okay, could we include those in the follow-up email to this? And maybe
100%.
we'll include a few of those resources in that. Perfect. Yep. Then I'll work with your team and we'll make sure that everybody, Shane particularly, will make sure that those are included in that follow-up email that goes out with the recording. All right. Let's see. Are there resources for smaller MSPs to get info on what coverage they should have and why? Seems like some insurance companies I approach are still figuring this out. And then on the other side, what I should have when approaching insurance. So it sounds like we've covered some of that and that some of that might be in those handouts.
Yeah. And Wilson, is there any other kind of like TLDR you would add to that? for an MSP, if you were saying, look, generally speaking, just be prepared. These are the things that matter, and you can put them even just like big buckets.
Yeah, making sure that you're getting, I'll also think, ask if you're approaching an insurance carrier or a brokerage, ask if they have a cyber insurance specialist on staff. Approach them with that question. Do you have a cyber insurance specialist on staff? I'd like to work with them. My risk is different than a normal client. I see a lot of MSPs that come to us for reviews. Hey, can you review my policy in place? They don't have the right policy in place. They either have just a cyber policy or just technology errors and omissions, or neither, or they're in a hole and they don't know where they got there. They thought they had something great for the last 5 years, but really it wasn't. Thank God nothing happened. But having a cyber insurance specialist on staff, more and more brokerages are having these people on staff, and you can ask for that, because your risk is different, and shopping your risk as well, shopping the right industry as well, and making sure that's correct just on the front end to start with, and then access to different carriers. So I think that's a good spot, especially if you're a smaller MSP. I think that was the question. But
what's your quick hit checklist though on categories of underwriting, right? So if we put like security in one, but policies, procedures, anything else?
Security, policies and procedures, revenue, industries that you work with. Those are the quick hitting ones. I would say on most applications that you're going to have to deal with. And if you're not going through with at least 3-page application, it's probably not the right policy. I think, you have a lot more underwriting than your clients probably will have. Especially if you're going through, getting a technology errors and omissions policy. That's correct.
Just to clarify for everybody. Sorry, Becky.
I said 3 pages? Like,
oh,
wow. I'm sure that's a minimum 3 pages.
At least, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, and here's the thing. So it actually speaks right to what I wanted to talk about, which is what we're talking about when we say tech E&O. Just to quickly define that.
Yep.
A policy today, you're providing services, right? So you have your own cyber exposure, right? So you need to get cyber insurance. Kind of at a basic level, we think we all understand kind of the cause and effect there. But that's for your business. That's not for your clients. This is for yours. In the same light, you're providing services to those clients, technology services. Now, you have a risk there, right? And what it could be perceived as an error or omission of your service. That's a big bucket, okay? Think of all the things you do. Think of all the ways that you service your client. Now, especially, you're going into the security aspect, okay? The way I put it is there's a lot of different ways that fingers can be pointed, okay? So Tech E&O takes all that and puts it into one policy. It's really, really nice. From my perspective, I'm like, this is great. It's efficient. But it allows you to have that protection, right? From a liability perspective, and in the event that there's a perceived error or omission by your client towards your services, and that'll include the cyber protection for your business as well. So just a quick definition on what it is we're talking about. So to anyone asking, hey, what should my business have? That's one component. When we go beyond that and we get into other lines, you got 2 cyber insurance nerds on this call. Okay. We're not necessarily general lines nerds, but we could still point you in the right direction. So when it comes to getting that level of consultation, we've got really good sources.
Perfect. James, how much leverage can a small business expect if they can show evidence of strong IR planning and testing?
Is it for an MSP?
Yes.
What have you seen,
I would
Wilson?
assume. James, I'm guessing you're asking about MSP, but let's talk both MSPs and their clients.
If you're asking for an MSP, it's great. Carriers want it's on pretty much every application now for technology errors and omissions. Do you have they like to call it the B word, a breach response plan. I don't like to use that one, so we'll call it an incident response plan. But do you have that in place? Some carriers will go into detail about it, but it'll help you get a policy. On if we're talking about just a small business on the client end, they may not even ask about it, to be honest. I mean, cyber insurance underwriting is 2 years behind good security. they're just now asking about MDR and EDR for small businesses right now this year in 2024. They're starting to require it and starting to ask about it, which they should have probably 2 or 3 years ago when they started figuring out MFA. So incident response plans for small businesses will start coming into play for small businesses on the client end. I think it will. But they're not asking about them on applications currently. Not a lot of carriers.
Yeah, some are asking.
Some are.
What really matters is how much does it actually relate to that question of, is it leverageable? I actually like that, because I would define leverage as like, does it affect my rate?
Yeah.
Does it affect eligibility? Right? Can I leverage this in any way, shape, or form? On the client side, it's still very security control centric. That's they're in an SMB space where they're still trying to find scale. They're trying to find easily adoptable solutions that they can look at to determine, okay, this is enough that it's reducing risk, and therefore I can move forward. I feel comfortable with it. As this becomes more popular, and this is what's really cool to watch in the MSP space, is as this industry kind of makes more waves on what's more accessible to the end clients and what is more broadly adopted, it allows carriers to then go, okay, this is not as big of an ask anymore, and it's going to become more part of my core underwriting. We're already seeing that with certain solutions. Just kind of like the trajectory is it is a business. They're trying to scale. They're trying to establish a footprint. They put the bar too high, they probably won't write any business. They put it too low, it's not good business. So they're always trying to find that middle ground.
So question for everybody in the audience was, you think of IR plans, assuming you have one in your business. If you don't, there's a template in the handout section. We'll be talking about that again in June's Fireside Chat. The question was, how many of you are helping or developing an IR plan for your customers? Is that a conversation you're having with your customers? Part of this is a selfish ask, is we're working on building a template for you to use with your customers to have that conversation for that June webinar. But just to know if we're kind of walking down the right path here, is that a conversation you're having with your end users about their IR plan? So again, just my curiosity, but thank you. Back to Q&A. This is getting longer than I can keep track of. So we're going to go with question 5 there, you guys. How do insurance companies that offer cyber insurance coverage determine whether a client, MSP, or IT provider know what they're doing? In other words, if they're not able to answer the questions, what's the responsibility or role of the insurance carrier?
So they're only able to evaluate based off of the answers that are provided on the application.
Yeah.
That's the truth of the matter. Okay. There's really no validation beyond that. Okay. Now, there's a lot of good theories out there that it's not just the present, it's not just what's present, it's how it's being managed. Right. So to answer your question, there's a couple different ways that carriers are trying to figure out, how do we get closer to the risk to actually validate? Because I think what you're asking is like, how do we know what they're doing? We don't. We have seen instances where folks have filled an application and lied, right? That's no good. So anytime you hear bad stories, that's usually where they come from. But all the truth comes out typically in forensics, right? Whenever they start, peeking under the hood and be like, all right, so the car broke down, let's see what's going on. They start looking at specifics. But there's no way to validate that right now outside of the questions that they're asking, which it's a tough position to be in as an industry, because some of them are literally asking from thousands upon thousands of miles away for you to fill out a static document of where you are one day of the year, which is kind of crazy on an ever evolving risk, right? But we're seeing more, like, the industry is moving in a direction to do more real-time validation. So to actually be able to say, hey, look, yes, we have MFA in place, but can you provide evidence that it actually has been enabled across all endpoints, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, we have EDR, MDR in place. Cool. On what clients specifically, and is it properly configured, right? We're getting there. But as you could imagine, the insurance industry, to go through those approaches, to even you guys, just put yourself in the consumer shoe to ask those questions, what it would require it's kind of a big ask. And so that's where it's kind of crawl, walk, run. We're kind of seeing that, but it really is going to be critical that needs to happen at some point in time, because that's going to do some really, really, really good things for the market, because they're still making a lot of broad assumptions without the right data.
So no, there's a lot to unpack in this webinar. I feel like we need to take some of these questions and do a whole separate branch out.
I also don't want to forget about the big W conversation as well with warranties. So whenever, as you look at the time, Becky, whenever you think that makes sense.
Okay, we'll get a few more of these questions answered, and know that we try and do these quarterly with FifthWall. So there's always going to be another session where we can get together and talk. And if not, like the questions you're asking here, this is what FifthWall specializes in. So if you're not already working with them, honestly, folks, they are some of the most approachable people I've met in the industry. They will always answer your questions either in a booth space, via email, through their website. Like, please know they're here to absolutely help, and this is their entire specialty.
Thanks, Becky.
Hey, yeah. Let's see. So if an organization experiencing a costly breach, and use the cyber insurance instead of recovering, will their premiums and requirements of cyber insurance be adjusted to ensure that the organization actually implements effective safeguards? So I would translate this like, do they make sure they're actually better next time, or do they just raise their rates?
They do. And I like to say cyber insurance helps you recover. I mean, you're not just using cyber insurance, you're not recovering. Cyber insurance wants you to recover from it. That's why it's in place. I think that should definitely be known. But they will have requirements that you make yourself a better risk, or better yourself with betterment, to become a better risk after the event. You have to show to the carrier, or if they non-renew you, which I've seen as well, the same carrier, like, you experienced a breach, an incident that happened, we're going to non-renew you. You got to show other carriers, if you want a policy, what happened during that incident. What are the loss runs showing? Give us a description of the event that happened, and how did you make yourself better afterwards? What did you implement internally to make yourself a better risk? And carriers will tell you, you should do this, and this. But, as risk advisors, as MSPs should as well, a lot of you have probably taken on companies that experienced an incident. Now they're looking for outside security.
Yeah.
As well. So what do they need to do to make themselves a better risk? It's a lot of those things that caused it in the first place. But cyber insurance helps you recover. I think that should be known as well.
Yeah, there was quite some time, Becky, that carriers did not care for those that had to touch the stove to know it's hot, right? So they didn't really, if you experienced an event, then you were banished. And it was very upsetting, because like for a while, whenever we were designing our own programs, I was like, I want the Islands of Misfit Toys, because they know and understand this now better than anybody. When it comes to the reality of what the consequences are. Yes, now they understand why the investments are necessary. What has evolved to today is there are some carriers, if you get dropped because you had a claim, do not take that personally. And this is more to the end client. These carriers are not looking specifically at your claim, and it was like, oh, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. That's it. We're done with. There has been probably already a long history of very light risks that got breached in a way, and they went, yeah, we don't have a tolerance for this because of what they'd experienced. There are plenty of other carriers that have not had that exact same experience. So to Wilson's point, whenever that occurs and you go to another carrier and you're remarketed, they're going to ask those specific questions, because they're like, yeah, we'd be happy to take you on now that you know the consequences here, but we are going to see some remediation. And guess what? Now policies are even including betterment. So they'll actually include coverage that when you get hit, they will put dollars and cents towards you improving your security posture, which is pretty cool.
Premiums do go up a little bit though, Becky. They will. Yeah. If you had a prior incident, that's a thing. It will. You will be paying more for the next 3 or so years. But that's the risk you took. Because of the incident, maybe you weren't protected in the front end. So I've dealt with a lot of companies and helped them through that exact process. Reshop, remarket, find you a policy, even if you didn't have a policy before as well. And working directly with the MSP to put those things in place that's needed.
But that's good to know that it's it's an increase, but it's for a number of years. So similar to other insurance, if you have an incident, if you're in an accident, your rate might increase for a number of years, but eventually there's some forgiveness there. That there's, something to work towards, I guess.
Yep. Some carriers ask for 3, some carriers ask for 5 years. It depends. And you don't want to lie in the applications, but that's what it's there for. Yep.
No, so I'm reading through the questions, trying to find a few that, this one I'm curious about. I'm only reselling vendor cyber services. Am I responsible at all?
Define responsible.
So that was one. It's I don't know if there's more. It doesn't look like there's any more, but I don't think you're absolved if you're just reselling someone else's product.
Yeah, I mean, I would want to define like what you're looking at when you say like responsible for anything in particular, anything specific. But I can go into a number of different scenarios here. If the thinking is, would a client perceive you? Yes, that's happened plenty of times. And that's really all it takes. From an insurance perspective, they really only care about who they have the contract with, and that's from the insurer to the insured. And that's what they're looking at. Now, if there is a very large scale event, and these are not things really that we see in the SMB market, we don't, just to be honest. But then they need to go subrogate, and they need to figure out, ways to make up and recoup. We have seen that. But typically but you have to be, it's very similar to the way you would look at it in court cases, that there has to be things that they can prove, whether it's negligence, whether it's, more transparent types of things. They can draw a line and say, look, no, you are responsible. That's why I asked, like, defining responsibility is a tough thing.
No, thank you. This one is one that we've talked about before. I want to make sure that we talk about it again. A range of cyber insurance applications are starting to ask about specific tools by name. So the app may have SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, but not Huntress. How do we coach clients that alternatives or equivalents are okay? So not necessarily how do we answer that question on the application, but how do we talk to clients that the equivalents and alternatives are okay?
Carriers aren't smart all the time. Let's start there. They're not. I mean, so they are educating themselves. We'll just say. So you can find a lot of very, very, very reputable insurance companies, right? And they will pick some of the quote unquote name brands. I will put my tinfoil hat on and say, well, how did those names get on there? And have we fought for Huntress for some time to get some of those names changed? We have, right? And I think there's a reality of there was a time and place where, I mean, that has happened for, Wilson, a year and a half, maybe a little longer. We've seen that, maybe even 2 years at this point. Those names haven't really changed that much.
Yep.
And it's almost like in the beginning, they said, hey, what are the main ones that we need to list? We'll list those. And then they just kind of didn't come back to it. Now, talking to your client about that was just me explaining what's going on there. Talking to your client about that, I think there's a reality is you can kind of relay some of that of what in carrier, carriers are putting those up for comparison when we say, like, there are tools out there that if you put a label, like a lot of tools are labeling themselves, maybe not inappropriately, but there's some gray area, right? But you start to put out some benchmarks to say, hey, look, here are some vendors that we're looking for. We can now relate to the specific tool that we're now talking about. Some of the things aren't very easily defined. And so I think if you're talking to a client and saying, look, yes, they are putting these vendors on here for comparison, but we know for a fact that Huntress is fine to be accepted.
Yep. I did a test one time, Becky. So this is just a one-off story. So one of the carriers asked, they have a full list of, the EDR vendors. And, I did a test. I was like, I'm going to test this out. Let's see what discounts happen when I do other and less Huntress. And then one carrier and then another EDR vendor that's actually on the list. Is there difference in pricing when it came out? It didn't change pricing at all, even though we changed the vendor there. So ultimately, doesn't matter. Maybe with some carriers, if you choose one of their approved vendors, but I chose other on the other one and wrote in Huntress, and it didn't change. The premium still lowered, just like it would if you would say you had EDR in place. So Are they vetting these approved vendors differently? I don't think so. But not to say they will at some point, but I think that's, when you see those carriers or approved vendors on the list and you have to put other, it's not a huge deal. Right.
No, thank you. That's interesting. And I'd be curious to see some of those does it list which specific version of those you're supposed to have, or does it just list the generic name?
Yeah, they
because
different.
That's the big piece of it, is there's so many variances under each of those brand names that it's just saying you have it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the requirement that you're trying to answer for.
Look, they used to ask folks, do you have MFA?
Yeah.
Question mark. That was a question. So they're getting better. Obviously, there's specifics matter. They figured out, right? Like where, on what. But just so you know, like those questions and the way they're worded, they do get reevaluated. But it's, some of them still are kind of, even to an industry that's rapidly changing, they're still kind of dry and dusty. They haven't changed them. They haven't updated them.
So knowing that we've got 19 minutes left, let's talk about warranties, and know that we will, again, the team at FifthWall is available to answer some of the other questions, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about the deeper stuff that we promised at the begining.
You just giving me an open platform to just talk about something, because don't do that.
You could just go, Reid. Go.
Okay. So no, let's just start here. So we get a number of questions about warranties. And so what's happening is, in the space of, in the land of opportunity right now, especially in our channel, we're seeing a lot of folks trying to create and separate and create something novel. Now, warranties have been along for a very, very long time. And we've done a number of webinars where what we're trying to do here is just educate, right? So as a product, they have a lot of good uses. They really do. Like, I want a good warranty on my refrigerator, right? Am I looking for my refrigerator's warranty to cover my house in the event of a fire? I am not. Okay, so there's a big difference. And so the big thing I probably want to start off on is we get a lot of questions about, like, does a warranty do this? Does a warranty do that? Blah, blah. And it is a policy. So don't forget about that. So reading the contract is really important. And we've read some of these contracts, and some of them are very much less to be desired, but we're not seeing them advertised that way. But here's probably the biggest thing I want MSPs on this call to understand is what we're starting to see something is relatively dangerous, is that now warranties are being said, hey, look, make it a part of your service offering. Embed it within your services. Monetize that warranty. Okay, I'm a risk advisor, right? I hear that, I go, oh no, you just made that part of your own liability. So as soon as you start to do that, right, those terms and conditions in that warranty now are part of your service. You just said, hey, this is part of my service, comes with this warranty. So in the event that does not go the way that client thought it would, right? And again, reading some of the terms and conditions of what we've seen, there are a lot of gaps for things to not go the way that they probably thought. It is a very clear line of liability. They can say, hey, look, you sold me this thing. I paid for it, right? You charged me for it, and it do what you said it would do. Guess what, folks? We just talked about Tech E&O. Tech E&O will not cover that, because technically warranties fall in a bucket that are closer to insurance. From a regulatory perspective, they're not viewed as such, so therefore you still have the ability to do what we just described. But you would actually have to have an E&O policy more similar to what an insurance agency would carry in order to have coverage for that type of scenario. So that's kind of my big soapbox thing, is like, I'm not trying to rain down on warranties as a concept as a whole, but how they're being treated right now in terms of becoming part of a service for an industry that may or not be really aware of the service itself. So I'm not hearing a lot of folks talk about the T's and C's, the specifics. I'm also not hearing folks really understand what it means to now include this within your services, right? So that's probably the biggest thing I would start with, Becky, is just to kind of open that up, is making sure folks are educating themselves. The other thing is understanding where it fits into the ecosystem of risk transference. So if I'm a business I understand, or hopefully I've worked with someone to understand the different, perils that are out there, the level of exposure my business has. And now I'm trying to say, okay, how do I want to handle that? Some of it, you know what, I view it as okay, I'm going to take it on. But there's a decent portion I would want to transfer over to an insurance policy. That's what we're doing here with risk management. And that's why that exists. When we talk about a warranty, we really have to make sure, what are we trying to do in that exercise with that warranty? Because if you have a comprehensive cyber insurance policy, you already took care of that. You already made that investment. I'm not seeing anything new in these warranties from a coverage standpoint where you're not essentially double dipping. You're just putting something over top. And so now, if there is nothing existing there at all, if you have a client that does not have insurance, but for whatever reason they would adopt a warranty, okay, there is plenty out there in terms of what a business owner is willing to take on when it comes to the investment to transfer risk and the cost and all of that. So Becky, those are probably the two big things that I came here all hot and heavy to talk about. But I just want to make sure, just from kind of a PSA standpoint, that's being considered and looked at by MSPs.
That's a lot. So it's
tape that one. Clip. That was a good one.
Wow. So are you seeing who is offering warranties? Okay, so I'm going to go really basic here, and I'm going to assume that maybe somebody in here isn't sure too. When we're talking warranties, are we talking a warranty that insurance is trying to sell on top of a liability package, or an insurance, not liability, an insurance package?
So I'm not going to name names unless you want me to, but there are vendors in the space right now, okay, that are approaching MSPs with this as a service offering. And that has kind of existed for a while though. 701's had a warranty, right? They've had one for a while. It's not great, if I'm being honest. If you read the T's and C's, it's but you know what? They're not trying to supplant anything with it. They're not trying to get someone to resell it, monetize it. They did it as a way of validation. Okay, read it. If you think it validates, you think it's good, it allows you to represent yourself in a different way. Awesome. But when you see outside third parties, vendors out there that are saying no, sell this. This is as a standalone thing. Take this warranty, adopt it as yours, and resell it in your service offering. That's when I go, danger, Will Robinson. Don't do that. Or do it, but also become very, very, very familiar with that product. Okay. So if you're going to do that, make a business decision. Read through that contract as if you would read any contract. Understand the exclusions, understand what it covers, understand what it doesn't cover, and make sure that's communicated to your own client. What I'm trying to avoid here is a situation where we are seeing this a lot, where it's just kind of you're not oversold, but you're just hey, no, trust me, it's good, it's fine. It's a good product, go for it. And the questions aren't asked. And then the MSPs are putting themselves in a vicarious position because of that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps clear up where we were going with that and puts it into a different perspective for me. And thank you again. I mean, this is a lot of what this is me asking questions that I assume someone else maybe has, maybe they don't. And this was obvious to everyone. And if so, I apologize for that. But that would be my next question then, is what do these warranties cover in this context? And more specifically, what's a warranty doing that your cyber insurance plan isn't?
Great question. So we have put documentation around this. And let me just put another disclaimer is this is from an education standpoint. So I want folks to get informed. I'm not trying to talk against something, but from a practice standpoint, I'm not speaking against a product, right? But when it comes to how you practice and what you're doing from a business operations standpoint, that is something I want to, try to get some good information out on. As far as overlap, Becky, we're not seeing there's from a coverage standpoint. So in our world, let me actually do from an education standpoint. If someone says cyber insurance, really there's 3 buckets. Okay. One is nothing at all. The client didn't have cyber insurance and they didn't get anything. One and two is what we call the endorsements, right? That's a big category. And these are things that someone will say, yeah, I have cyber coverage, but it was an add-on to another line, right? Maybe they have a general lines policy, right? And their broker said, hey, I can add on cyber for like $100. What do you think? You should question that if it's $100. And a lot of the statistics are still derived, including that product in there. So they'll say, oh, we're still seeing X amount of claims be denied. Okay, well, how many were from the endorsements and how many were from the third category that I'm about to mention, which is comprehensive insurance. Comprehensive insurance is a standalone product that was specifically designed and built to tackle and handle and be the safety net for the exposures that we are aware of and we're observing right now of businesses, right? So slowly but surely, they're always trying to add on to say, this is a product, trying to sell a product, right? They want it to be a quality product. Is it protecting the business as much as they can, soup to nuts, from a cyber liability event, right? And it's going to have those modules of coverage. So if we take that product, that third product, and I compare that to the warranties I've seen, there's nothing novel. Nothing novel that I'm seeing. Sorry, that was a really long way to answer it, but I just want to make sure we defined what we're comparing to, right? Those categories.
Yeah, that's. I'm just reading through to make sure that we're not missing anything here.
And if the Reid warranty soapbox is fine to step down from, by all means, let's go back to the E&O conversation.
No, we have one more warranty question, and I'm trying to make sure. So I feel like a lot of MSPs are being sold a bag of goods regarding warranty and don't understand the legal meaning.
I think one big thing that warranties claim to do is, hey, give me money now. They're quick to pay out sometimes, right? So if you gave a client, hey, client, you just experienced an incident. Here's $500,000. Go do what you want to do. Do they know what to do? Do they have a forensics team ready to go? Is the MSP going to step in and do forensics? Does the MSP know how to do that? What do they do with that $500,000? Yeah, they could maybe pay their employees back if they can't run payroll, or, go buy some computers. But are they doing it correctly and on the law? If data is released, what's going on there? So I think getting money right away sounds like a fun thing, but what do you do with it after that? What do you do with it? That's a big thing too. I think misconceptions around warranty. Cyber insurance, again, I'll go back to my prior thing. They help you through the incident. You're retaining their coverage. They're bringing in the experts, the forensics teams, the lawyers, the groups of people to help you through the incident. A ransom negotiator. I've talked to a ransom negotiator before. That's a special person to talk through that incident with the bad actors in your system. Yeah, it's completely different coverage we're talking about there with the warranties and thing. But I hope that paints the picture too a little bit more.
That helps explain so much.
Okay, good.
No, thank you. This is. I did not know that this existed. I learned a lot today. I always do from you guys, and it scares me even more. So thank you. But there's so much to unpack here. Let's go back to a few questions then in our last few minutes, if that's okay. So let's see, there's one here. Do you find many policies have a very high deductible, i.e. 20,000 or above? What types of deductibles are you seeing in policies, and does that make that much of a difference on their premiums?
I mean, Wilson, are you in the SMB space?
No.
Are we really seeing?
No,
when we talk 100 million in revenue or below, typically in insurance, that's what they're considering small business, right? And that's, by that definition, that's kind of, because if you ask, how do you define SMB, small, medium sized business, you're going to get a different answer. But typically in that space, no. I mean, Wilson, unless you've seen something that's kind of like been crazy out of the norm.
I wrote 4 policies last week, probably for SMBs. We're talking, a revenue around $3 million a year. Their deductible was $2,500 per claim, per incident, per coverage needed, $2,500. I mean, the most I'll see for an SMB maybe is up to 10 grand for certain industries, but usually it's below, $5,000 or lower. And sometimes they'll do, a deductible. You'll have $2,500 for your first and third party coverages, but your crime coverages, That's going to be a little higher at 10 grand. So different deductibles for different coverages, but rarely do I see it over 20 grand unless you have very high revenue, and you're probably looking at higher limits at that point. You need 2 million, 3 million limits at that point. So that in turn brings higher deductibles or and retention.
We'll get that question a lot on strategy. Like, hey, if I continue to increase my deductible, will it decrease my premium? The answer is yes. Does it decrease it in a significant way? You really have to increase that deductible like significantly. And then the underwriter starts asking very specific questions like, what don't I know? Right? Why do they want? Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of as you're thinking through, what deductible you should agree to on your homeowners. How much of that do you have in the bank at any given moment?
Yep.
I have to believe should be a consideration for a business owner as well as what can you pay out of pocket in that minute.
Yep.
To
and you're retaining it. It's not just, hey, you had a car crash, you pay your one deductible. If you have multiple coverages, that's multiple retentions that you have to pay for each coverage. Right. So it's not just, $5 grand for the whole event. You may have to pay 20 grand for the whole event because you're bringing in probably 4 or 5 different coverages for a catastrophic event. So different coverages needed, different retention or deductible, which a lot of clients do not know. So if you're raising that deductible, feel free to pay out, 80 grand for that whole event.
But if someone's working with you, I'm assuming that is something you can help them to understand.
Oh, yes. That's a big talking point that I have with every client. Need to understand your retention or deductible that you have in place. Why that's important. Why do you want to hire it? Well, we do it with other, policies. It lowers our premium. Well, with cyber, it's different. Let's talk about it. Why do they call it retention more than deductible? So, that's big conversation to have.
The takeaways for me today is pretty much everything in cyber insurance is different and it depends. But there's so many variables to every piece of this I learned a lot today. So I think we have time for one. There's so many questions and there's so many good ones, but there's one here that I did want to hit. Can you elaborate on your earlier comment for us as an MSP to include the cybersecurity insurance as a part of our E&O to be efficient? Does that mean that there is no separate cybersecurity insurance policy because it's rolled into E&O? If so, what would be missing in that in a holistic paradigm?
Yeah, and sometimes when I talk, maybe the words don't come out as cleanly as I'd hope. What I was referring to is the efficiency is that Tech E&O combines those two coverages together into one policy form, where the alternative would be like you would have to go out and get a cyber policy, be underwritten for that, and then you'd have to go out and get a E&O policy, a separate policy for that. The efficiencies are one with a carrier underwriting both, right? You're going to get one clean perspective on both lines, and the other is going to be cost, right? Where Wilson, I don't know if you have any good examples of that, but like it is not that much more expensive with some of these carriers that have designed these products by simply adding those together. And some of them holistically have come out. That's how they were made. And some of them were actually designed after the fact. They said, hey, we should probably merge these two together. And that's
a lot of carriers right now will not write an MSP just for cyber. They will not. They don't want that liability. They don't want to write that policy. You have to include technology errors and omissions as well as comprehensive cyber on one form. It's not a cost-saving thing. I review MSP's policies a lot. I've read policies where they've had them separate, but the languages on this contradict each other. Like if you carry this or if a cyber event happens, we're not going to pay out. And if you have a cyber event, your clients are probably affected and that liability comes on you, but that's not going to pay out because you had a cyber event and they're separate policies. So look to combine them. That should be.
It's the Spider-Man meme.
Yeah, it is.
They're just all.
Yeah.
Boom, boom. You pay.
One more question that I want to make sure we cover because I think this is very different than other questions in here. For the MSPs, how does staff certification in the information security space change the premium? So does having certified staff or any sort of additional training for your staff, does that affect premiums or insurance companies even asking that question?
You seen that on the MSP level, Wilson?
I've seen them ask for certifications, but I've never seen a carrier dig in deep about that. Like, how far is your certifications go within your staff or what you're doing? Maybe some one-off subjectivities, Reid, but
yeah, I mean, on certain like compliance or certain certifications for the business as a whole, right? We've seen more of that. But no, not at the staff level.
Okay. That I hadn't seen that question before, and it was a really
that's good. That's a good one. And you know what? It
where
makes a
things
lot
are
of
going.
sense because back to my earlier comment of it's not just what's in place, it's how it's managed, right? Want to make sure you have good, competent people that, there's definitely a higher bar for those that have gone through a process of certification in certain areas than those that have not. So it's a great question. Actually, that gets me thinking that maybe that's something they should be looking at.
See, maybe that's something we see in a few months from now to a year, whatever timeline they change. Well, thank you everyone for staying on a few seconds longer so we could answer that last question. Reid, Wilson, thank you as always so much for your time today. You guys bring such amazing information every time we have you on. And Wilson, special thank you for reading ahead on the topics for May and June. Yes, in May, we're having why you should have a lawyer in your corner, more specifically, a lawyer who understands MSP. Wilson, you covered that today, of having your cyber insurance understand your business model. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's important that your lawyer should as well. And then in June, we're going to talk about incident response planning again. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Sorry those questions that we didn't get to, but we will.
Happy to answer any if you want to come over and ask them. Yeah.
Beautiful. And how can folks get in touch with you, Wilson?
On our website, you can just fill out our MSP intake form. That'll connect you right with us. I'd even put my email in here as well. I'll put it in the chat if anyone wants to just reach out directly. But our intake form on our website is probably the best.
Perfect. And Reid just put it up there. So FifthWallSolutions.com/MSP. Thank you again. And we will see you the next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Becky.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Bye.